Check one, 2, 3. Hey everybody, it's Michael Helms, also known as Michael the Sound Guy, and this is the Location Sound Podcast. You know, each episode we talk with location sound mixers, boom ops, and other industry pros about the various aspects of recording sound on location, whether it's for feature and independent films, TV commercials, interviews, any time where dialogue from actors is recorded. I started my career in the recording studios in New York City with some of the big artists back in the day, and later on projects for networks like HBO, Sci-Fi Channel, and the Cartoon Network. As time went by, I got out of the studio and began working in production sound. Whether you're a seasoned veteran or just starting out, thanks for joining us. All right, my guest today is a production sound mixer, post-engineer, and studio engineer based out of Knoxville, Tennessee. Please welcome Tom Backus.
Hello.
All right, Tom, when you are working as a production sound mixer on set, what's in your audio kit? So just give us a rundown of your mixer, your recorder, preferred mics, and everything in between.
Well, right now in my bag, I have a Nomad 10 recorder with the Lectrosonics SRb receivers, the SMQV transmitters, microphones. I use DPA 4063s and 4071s, as well as Sanken COS-11s. On the boom, I've got the Schoeps, the Cmit for outdoors, and the MK41 on the CMC5 for anything else indoors. That's pretty much the bag. I also have a feature sound cart for movie stuff. So whenever I go out and do that, that's one of those RastOrder carts from Mike Stalder in Australia. And I have a Sonosax SX-ES64 mixer on that. And then I just put the Nomad on that and wire it all up and use the same Lectrosonics receivers and transmitters and stuff like that. So it's either in the bag or on the cart. I tend these days to not be doing as much bag work because the years have not been kind to my back. So I'm kind of leaving that to the younger guys to take those jobs, basically. I've been kind of just focusing more on, either feature work or post-audio work, basically. But yeah, that's what's in my bag.
All right. What kind of timecode boxes do you like?
Actually, I just use the ERX boxes hooked up to the Nomad that spits out timecode on one side and audio on the other side. And I've been pretty lucky with that. I don't have any ambient or any other type of locket boxes myself.
Okay. Now, we haven't had a lot of guests that like using the Nomad, so tell us a little bit about the Nomad experience.
I used to work for Jupiter Entertainment, and back when they got into reality TV shows, it was up to me to gear up everything. So the Nomad was really the only choice out there for multi-track recording, mixing in a bag situation. So we got into those fairly early on, and then the sound devices stuff came along later on after that. But, we'd already gone down the Zaxcom road, basically. And I like it. I mean, it's been rock solid. It works fine for me. I'm used to it, but I can see where other guys would be intimidated by it, because unless you spend some time with it beforehand, kind of setting it up and figuring it all out, it can be a little deep in its configuration setup, basically. But once you get used to it, that's kind of like what It's like any type of computer system, really. Yeah, it's worked out fine for me.
Okay. Now, do you have anything, any special outboard gear on your cart that you can talk about?
No, the only thing I've got on there is just a little one rack unit speaker, so that if I need to listen to something or whatever, but there's nothing outboard based in terms of, signal processing that is on the cart. It's all just straight through the mixer. The mixer has EQ on it and, a limiter on each channel. So I could EQ if I needed to, but usually try not to. That's about the extent of any type of processing that will go on.
All right. Now, I was checking out your IMDb, and you were re-recording mixer for 128 episodes of the TV series documentary City Confidential. So first, I guess tell some of our listeners that may not know what a re-recording mixer does, and then how was your experience working on that show?
Well, a re-recording mixer is just basically the post-audio mixer. There's lots of different ways of crediting the same job, I guess. So, you just take the audio files that are edited to the picture and make a complete soundtrack out of it for broadcast. That's, re-recording mixer is kind of the bigger name that they use on feature films. Not so much in the TV world do you get credited like that. But that show kind of started the whole murder porn genre, actually, back before Discovery ID and all those other networks. It was on A&E back when they were really A&E. And that started, I went on the first location shoot for that first episode. So I did the location sound for that, for a lot of those episodes, as well as the post-audio mixing part of that. It was pretty basic as far as recording audio and location. You're just doing interviews and then B-roll sound, basically. So, yeah, just mixing the post-audio part of that. Mixing is, it's voiceover, it's interviews, it's music, and some sound effects and nat sounds, basically. So it's pretty quick. And once you get a template set up and all your processing dialed in, you can blow through episodes fairly quickly. And, that show went on for a long time until the voiceover talent, Paul Winfield, passed away, and then they replaced him. And I think it went downhill from there. But it was the start of the whole murder documentary type thing. And that was at Jupiter Entertainment. And then they went on to create a whole bunch of other type of murder porn shows that they basically make a living on today.
Yeah, I used to work with a gentleman, Peter Thomas, who's a voiceover for the TV show, the series Forensic Files. And I actually I met a young lady, her name is Janelle Jordan. She's with Production Hub, and she's also vice president of Women in Film and Television. And she used to work with Peter Thomas on Forensic Files, and they did over 250 episodes. She actually met her husband working on the show. He was also a director and doing all these reenactments and stuff. So yeah, it's interesting. Those long time shows that just go on and on. A lot of, like you said, the same voice actor for all those years. So
yeah, the longest running show that Jupiter Entertainment does right now is called Snapped, and I worked on that initially when I was still at Jupiter. The first season was with a known actress doing the voiceover, and then they changed the second season, and then the third season, they started using an in-house producer to do the voiceover. So I actually had to go to her house and build a voiceover booth in her walk-in closet for her to just go and record the voiceovers for this show. And it went on for quite some time where she would just record the voiceovers in her closet and they'd be in the show. That show Snapped is on season 26 right now, which is unheard of in, TV land. But they've since changed voiceover artists and whatnot, like, they always are trying to do. But for the most part, it's still an ongoing show. And I mix some of those from time to time. Now that I'm freelance, they send them to me every now and then. But they're really, very basic shows to mix in terms of television stuff. But I don't know if the current voiceover artist for that show now is recording in her walk-in closet. Probably not.
Now, having done the post audio, do you approach location sound recording any differently?
It mostly ends up being that you are better able to decide what kind of background noises are acceptable or not based on your previous experience mixing, as well as knowing kind of what you can and can't fix or take out or, undo when you get into the mixing stage. There's been some times where I've actually had like a white noise generator going during an interview because it would help mask some traffic sound that was more transient sounding. And then that way, once I got into post, I could kind of pull that whole thing down. Whereas if it was a quieter room, you would hear more of the traffic noise more prevalently. So, yeah, I mean, when you're on location, that's pretty much what, your experience mixing the stuff allows you to say, oh, yeah, I can take that out, or I can, bring that down or whatever, with a lot more confidence than if you had never done any post audio mixing, basically. That's pretty much the only difference.
Okay. Now with the white noise generator, was that something like you use some phase reversal or anything to cancel that out, or was it something different?
No, basically, like if you're in a room, like doing an interview and the air conditioning is on and it's just kind of an underlying tone of air handling and moving, and it's constant, then, I mean, that becomes the room tone. And so that helps kind of hide anything that's more transient, like people walking down the hall or talking or something like that. It kind of mixes it all together and allows you to just kind of pull the whole thing down. Whereas if it was quieter, those transient noises would be more prevalent and you would have to surgically go in and remove stuff, which sometimes you just can't do. So the whole phase reversal thing on sounds just never, ever really works in my experience. Whether you're outside and there's like this time of year around here, the cicadas are really bad. So, and I talk to these location guys who are on shoots right now who are having to deal with that. And there's really nothing you can do. I mean, you try and isolate your microphones as best as possible, but there's no there's always a producer that's going to say, hey, why don't you put a microphone up in that tree out of phase and record the cicadas differently and we'll pull it out and post. And it's like, that's not really going to work. So I've never been in a situation where we've done that and it's actually been acceptable. So,
the one time I saw that work really well was I was working in New York City, and recording engineer Andy Wallace was working with Jeff Buckley, a musician up there. And when he put on the headphones, he would hold back a little bit because he could hear himself really well. So he wasn't giving that performance that he needed to. So they actually put speakers in the studio, and he sang with, singing at the top of his voice with those speakers. And then we recorded that music track separately and flipped it out of phase. And it was amazing. I was really impressed, but yeah, people don't always know you can do those kind of things.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to do in a controlled studio where, stuff isn't moving around. Yeah. And people who want to sing their lead vocal without wearing headphones in the control room, I mean, they'll do that with the speakers to be able for them to hear the track and be able to sing. Yeah, it's pretty common thing to do in the studio, but for location stuff, it's never, ever worked right. So that's just kind of I don't know how that started. It's not really a myth. I mean, it could work, but it has to be the perfect setting and scenario for all of that to come together and actually, just hit the phase reverse button and everything goes away and it's a perfect sound. That's not the case.
Well, you also worked on multiple episodes of the TV series documentary, I think, Homicide Hunter, Lieutenant Joe Kenda. So is that similar to the City Confidential type projects?
The Homicide Hunter show, which is right now in its last season, I just finished mixing the first 3 episodes of this season 9. And it's a different animal altogether because all these new murder porn shows have reenactments. And that means that there's a multitude of scenes within the show that are people acting, and they're acting out scenarios. And so you have that. Whereas like in the old City Confidential show, it was just interviews and B-roll and then narration. Now, Homicide Hunter and all these other crime shows have actors, and there's, little movies being made. And then you have, Joe Kenda on camera talking, and then you have interviews as well. So they tend to load that show up with a whole lot of sound design. I mean, a whole lot compared to, like, I've done movies that didn't have as many tracks. It's really interesting. So it's a different type of show to mix. It takes a lot more. And, obviously you still have either the same amount or less time to mix these shows. And the producers who will watch the show and give you notes on your mixes are way more particular about all the sounds and everything. So you never know, like, because you're mixing on your own and then you send it off and then they send you notes back. They're not sitting here in the room with you going, no, fix that now or whatever. So it's a process. So you have these reenactments, and a lot of times all you're doing is fixing audio because A, they don't have a great production sound mixer, or B, they don't have great actors, or C, they don't have enough time to do everything properly. So most of what you're doing is just trying to make things intelligible and clean and, make sense of it all, basically. So it's more fun to work on because there's more going on, but it's kind of like, how good do you try and get it based on the amount of time you have to work on it? And you end up, compromising a lot, basically. But it's still a pretty good show. It's just, it's tough because it's kind of like, is it like a student film where, people are learning as they go, that sort of thing. It's interesting, to say the least.
All right. Now, are they wiring the talent as well and then booming?
Mostly their talent is wired and there's no booming because there's only one sound guy and he's wearing a bag and he's dealing with wires, and the actors are, either they're wearing like a full SWAT team gear setup and, lots of noise, or they're detectives who are constantly changing shirts and ties because they're shooting everything out of sequence. So he's running around just trying to keep all that straight, and there's no way to boom anything. And even if he did, they don't do coverage like they would on a feature shoot where they would do a master and singles and close-ups and that sort of thing. So most of the audio is all just from the wires.
Okay. In post, are you using anything like Isotope RX7 or anything like that to clean things up?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's, I don't know if you could ever go back. When I first started in the business, there were no computers, so all we had was like one parametric EQ. So now, the whole denoising and spectral repair and all that is, that's your moneymaker right there, basically. So yeah, there's a lot of RX happening.
All right. Well, speaking of wiring talent, do you have any tips on how you like to wire talent over the years that you've picked up?
Every situation is different based on, the scenes you're doing and the wardrobe they're wearing and, just how much time you have to actually spend wiring them. I mean, it all comes into play. So your best bet is the fact that you have experience wiring people, and you kind of figure it out beforehand, like, okay, because you can't go up to somebody and wire them up and then go back and listen and go, oh, this doesn't work, and then you can't go back up and say, I need another 5 minutes to change this whole setup. Your first time in is your only time, a lot of times. So there's no real tricks or anything. It's just having all the different tools available to you, like, right there when you walk up to the person. Do you have the right, type of tape, the right type of mounts, or just anything? And you're just kind of winging it as you go. That's been my experience.
Okay. What kind of expendables do you like to use when you're wiring?
Mostly I use the Rycoat, the pre-cut adhesive. I don't even know what you call them.
Got the overcovers, the undercovers, the stickies.
Yeah, all of that. Basically, I have a baggie full of that stuff, and surgical tape and all sorts of other types of tape, and you just kind of start throwing that stuff at it as you go. And I'll try and prepare the wires beforehand as much as possible. So once I get up there, I can just kind of slap it in there and for the best. And a lot of it is predicated on the type of material that somebody's wearing as well. Cotton is good and wool and silk is bad, and, all of that. So, you just take a look at the person, and you can kind of, after doing it for so long, you kind of like, okay, I think I can make this happen. And then you wire them up, and then they end up going in and climbing a tree or something, and you weren't prepared for that. Or, there's always something thrown in the last minute. You never know.
All right. Now, you started off as a studio engineer recording and mixing music, but how did you get into location sound?
I was living in Rochester, New York, and I got a job at a studio there. And the studio, it was a recording studio, and we did a lot of projects. But then the owner started branching out into video production, and he built some editing suites and a sound stage. And because we had a staff of audio engineers, that some days most of us would be sitting around because there was not much work. So we started going out on locations. So he had a Nagra and a boom pole and one wireless mic, and we'd start using all that. And that just kind of, the whole business kind of morphed into that, because as computers came about, people wouldn't go to recording studios to record their music as much. So we started doing more audio for video, basically. So between going out on location, doing the sound for that, and then going back in the studio and doing the post audio mixing, it just kind of morphed into all of that. So on one day you could be recording an orchestra for a jingle, and the next day you could be mixing a corporate video soundtrack or something. So it was just a lot of variety, but being able to go from one arena to the other, whether it was on location or in the studio or video or film, it didn't matter. Every day was different, and you just kind of evolved that way.
What has been the most interesting project you've worked on so far?
I mean, apart from traveling around the world on location, it's really hard for me to say. I mean, I've gone to the world's largest diamond mine in Australia, and done a lot of shooting in Alaska, and, gosh, I don't know. There's nothing that sticks out as like the most unbelievable or interesting thing that I've worked on, and probably have forgotten it anyways. But that's a really hard question to answer, because the variety is so great that, to one person, this may be interesting, but to another person, something else might be. I don't know. They all just kind of run together after a while, and you start to forget them all.
Now, did you have any particular, technical challenges on set? So say if you're in Alaska and it's cold or hotter climates or anything like that?
Always. Weather is always going to play into everything that happens when you're on set. Remember, I was in Minnesota for an 18-day shoot on a frozen lake. We were doing it was a demo pilot thing for a ice fishing show. And it's 45 below in the wind. So you dress for the outside, and, your batteries don't last long at all in the cold. And you learn that early on. So you have to, prepare for that. And it's mostly the cold that's going to affect the way you work more than the hot, more so. Alaska was the same way. I mean, when it's cold, you have to keep your batteries warm. Otherwise, they're going to go dead really fast. The rest of the gear doesn't really care about the cold. I mean, back when I was still recording on a Nagra, that would, you would have to think about that a little bit more when it was cold, because stuff would start to stiffen up on you, and, the oils in the machine and stuff would get, a lot thicker and stuff like that. But that's when you're outside for a long time, and nobody should be outside that long anyway. So mostly the gear these days is just batteries that you have to worry about in the cold.
Yeah, I think one of our previous guests, Jimmy Seiska, worked on ice holes, and he talked about what a challenge it was to keep the batteries warm, and they had all those little hand warmers that they would stick all over the batteries just to kind of keep them going. But yeah, he said it was extremely frigid. It sounds like you experienced the same thing.
Yes, it certainly was. a challenge. I mean, you're out there on the ice and it's super cold, but they're shooting inside one of these ice chalets that's on the ice, and it's 70 degrees inside there. And like they're, the camera guys are inside, and you're like, nope, I'm going to stay outside because I'm dressed for 45 below, not 70 degrees. And you can't just go from one to the other instantly. So you just have to suck it up. That's part of the job.
Now, as a freelance sound recordist, how do you manage your finances? Do you use a CPA, or how do you kind of keep track of everything over the year?
Well, I use a CPA for my taxes, obviously, but throughout the year, I use QuickBooks Self-Employed. I think that's what it's called. So it's like an online thing that's set up so I can do invoicing and whatnot through that. And that's pretty much it. It's as simple as it can be for me. Money in, money out, invoices paid, invoices not paid. It's pretty simple. And then around tax time, you just start gathering all your stuff. You've saved receipts and print out stuff and make all your columns and say, here's what I spent on this and this and this, and give it to your CPA and hope for the best.
All right. Now, did you have any mentors along the way that kind of helped you out?
Man, I wish. No. Everything was, reading, just listening. There wasn't any one person that was like, all right, here's this and here's how you use it. There was none of that. So it was all kind of just learning on your own. And I would just read everything I could get my hands on. I remember early on just getting the print catalogs from Location Sound Services. And they always had articles in there about how to do different things. And that was really helpful back in the day before the internet, and then just kind of practicing on yourself, even like getting your friends and saying, let me practice wiring you up or something like that. And they thought you were crazy, but it didn't matter. But there wasn't any one person. It was just kind of, once people realize that you're a sound guy, they put you in that position and it's up to you to fail or succeed. And there's been times when I've failed miserably. And, for the most part, I think I've been succeeding because I've been making a living at it for so long. So must be doing something halfway right.
Now, I met your colleague, Paul Jones, at a conference, and he recently introduced us. So you guys are part of Orelation Music. Tell us about that group.
Paul Jones and Chris Robbins are the Orelation Music group. Myself, I'm totally outside of that, although I was doing all my post-audio mixing in my house, and I was like, I would love to build a surround sound mix room. And at that same time, Paul was looking at this new studio space. And so I came over with him and we looked at it all together and was like, yeah, we can make this work. So Paul is a composer. He's been around for a long time as a composer. And because you're a composer, you're also a recording engineer and every other type of technical person that you need to be. So him and Chris are composers. They write music for whatever. I mean, it doesn't really matter. Then I'm here working on my own projects as well as anything that they might think I could help them out with, whether it's TV spots or radio spots or independent films or whatever they're working on. We have a studio here. It's a big recording space. We have a surround sound mix room and a couple of other rooms for composing in. And they also have a online music library and a sound effects library. And so that's their end of the business, whether it's just having a bunch of people write a bunch of music for their music library that they then send out to production companies, or actually composing specific music for a specific project. And Paul has gotten into, because you need to have many irons in the fire, podcasting, and he directs the local children's theater musicals and, just anything and everything that is going to help further your business, basically. I can't think of anything else that comes to mind that he's not into, but there's quite a bit. It's amazing. Every day in this studio, I walk in and I never know what to expect. Like there was they'll set up a room one day for one thing, and then it'll be totally different the next day. So it's always changing.
Now, we always ask the question, what was your worst on-set experience?
When I worked at Jupiter Entertainment, they produced a show called Sons of Guns for Discovery. And it was based in a gun shop in Baton Rouge. And so a lot of that production I had to go down and work on. I don't know why, but it was a very toxic environment, just because of I don't even want to call them talent, basically, the people in the show. When the whole thing finally imploded, I went down there to kind of fill in, and the talent, the people that worked on the show, you'd walk in the morning and you'd give them their microphones and they'd wire themselves up because they thought they knew everything. But it was just like pulling teeth to get them to do anything that, you wanted, because everything's made up in these shows. So you go in and they're like, all right, let's do this and do this, so at the end of the day, there was one day where they just decided they didn't want to do it anymore. And they all jumped in this one vehicle and took off down the street. So the producer was like, we need to follow them. And I was like, what? So, a bunch of camera guys and me jump into another vehicle and we chase them down the street. And they turned off and drove into the middle of this field. And we pulled into this parking lot near the field. And we get out, and I, because they're all in this one vehicle and they're all wired still, I can hear them. So I'm listening, and he's like, what are they saying? I'm like, well, they're just talking about like how they hate this whole thing and whatever. So it turned into this circus, really. I don't understand it. But then the show ended up dying a huge death because the lead guy in the show ended up being arrested and being charged with these very heinous crimes of child abuse and rape and all sorts of other things I don't really recall. But once that happened, Discovery just kind of, pulled the plug on it and made the whole thing disappear like it never existed, which was really kind of weird, but understandable, obviously. It was just the type of situation where you're like, get me out of here, because this is no fun anymore. We're not making any good TV. Nobody really cares. Just bad all the way around. And, I wasn't sad to see that show end at all.
Mm.
Yeah.
Now, we always like to ask if you've ever forgotten any equipment when you're headed to set.
No, because I'm super anxious. Even after 35 years of doing this, every time I have a shoot to go to or whatever, I'm preparing days ahead for every instance, and I take everything I can think of just so that I have it with me. And, usually don't end up using half of it, but at least it's there just in case. I'm always running through scenarios in my head about like, okay, what if I have to do this? And what if I have to do that? And so preparation is the key, whether it's getting ready to go on location or even like mixing a show in post. If you're preparing your tracks, you're preparing your gear, and you've gone through all the steps and you have thought through everything, chances are you're going to forget something along the way. But yeah, I'm just super anxious about like, once I get there, I don't want to be late. I want to be early, and I want to have everything I need. And, if they throw something at you at the last second, like, hey, do you have one of these? I'm like, nope, we didn't talk about that. And I didn't bring one. So, and they're like, okay, no problem. But I've never shown up anywhere and actually had anything that I've forgotten. That goes without saying that, you show up and something's broken, but figure something out, I guess. So I've been lucky so far.
No, that's good. Well, how has the business changed since you started?
Gosh, well, when I started, everything was analog. So it's changed quite a bit from that. Now everything's computer-based, which is good and bad, obviously. Like for production stuff, budgets are tighter, shooting schedules are shorter, but there's still the same amount of hours in the day. So, quality goes way down because you've only got X amount of time to do stuff. So that always seems to keep creeping up every year or season or whatever. It's like, we used to do this shoot in 10 days and now we have to do the same shoot in 6 days or 4 days or whatever. That seems to be the biggest change. The gear's gotten better, obviously. I mean, I remember using the C-Tech Vega wireless microphones back in the day that were, iffy at best. So, you've got way better gear and you can record things a lot better. And I've noticed that even doing in post-mixing audio because you hear a lot more. So now we have to deal with a lot more cleanup because recordings are more pristine. Lip smacks and all sorts of other little sounds that you normally wouldn't have heard before are there, and you kind of notice them, so you have to do something about it. That's really all I can say about that.
Well, Tom, as we kind of start to wrap things up, what's the best way for people to connect with you online?
Well, I have a website, tombackus.com. I don't think anyone's ever seen it. I don't think I've ever seen it. I think my contact info is on there as well. Actually, tombackus@mac.com is my email address. So if anyone wants to get in touch with me, they can hit me up that way.
Well, I want to say thanks to Tom Backus for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
And a big thanks to all of our listeners out there. If you'd like us to discuss a particular topic, please send us an email at locationsoundpodcast@gmail.com. We would love for you to subscribe and leave us a comment. We're available on Apple Podcasts, and for Android users, check out Google Podcasts. Also, we're on Stitcher, Spotify, TuneIn Radio, and on your favorite podcast app. Until next time, remember, sound is half the picture.